All right. Hey, everybody. What is going on? Hold, please. Yeah. Okay. How's the studies going? Maybe done the top hat, um, or anything else? Everything going good with that? Okay. That's good. Great to hear. Awesome. Hold, please. I have to download the PowerPoint for today, so it's going to be a second. And by that I mean exactly 1 second because it just opened. Okay. All right. Let's get started. So, respiratory system. Done. Over it. We're done. We're out. We're good. Um, Next, digestive system. I don't know why I'm being weird about that. We're going to talk about the digestive system today. Hey, my eye feels better for anybody who was wondering. So we're all very concerned and that Ian had a um, vigil for me. That was very kind. It worked. Thank you. Um, and now my eyes work again, which is awesome. All right, entire screen. Here we go. Check. All right. So we talked about the lungs. We talked about the trachea. We talked about the pharynx and all that fun stuff. Okay. Today we're going to talk about digestive system. So let's talk about it. Sorry, I get a lot of sirens around here. I live on the highway, so it's pretty loud. Okay, digestive system. What is it? Apples. Eating apples are fun. Great slide. Huge contribution to knowledge. All right, components of the digestive system. So let's take an apple or a corn dog that I just ate. Here's a stick. I'm gonna eat this corn dog. Okay, nom 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 nom. All right, that goes into my mouth. That's my mouth hole right here. This whole thing is my mouth. Okay, that's the anatomical term for it. Tongue. Right there. That's part of the digestive system. And then there's also some other things that you can't really see. Okay, so food goes in your mouth hole. That your tongue pushes that food down. Food is dissolved and basically grossly broken up by saliva. So you've got salivary glands from your parotid, and you've got sublingual and submandibular glands as well. So you can actually feel those. So your submandibular glands, if you kind of go like this, they're like right there. You can kind of feel those around there. You'll feel like a dip between where your like tongue and like bottom of your mouth is and your mandible. Where you just kind of trace that, you'll hit that, and that's submandibular glands. There's lymph nodes there too, so it's kind of all the same. But yeah, you can feel that. Your parotid gland is like right here. It's you can feel that too. It's around those muscle mastication, right? But it's like it's sub cutaneous, so it's right there. Okay. From there, your food goes down into the pharynx, where it goes down the esophagus, into the stomach, through the woods, into the small intestine, and then the large intestine. And then there's a whole bunch of small intestine things we'll talk about. And then into the large intestine, up, transverse, down, descending, into your sigmoid colon, and out your rectum, and into your anal canal and okay? So that's basically the breakdown of that. So there's some supplementary organs that kind of go involved with that, but that's the pathway of food, okay? The functions of it. So why do we eat? What's the point of eating? Ingestion, mechanical processing, chemical processing, propulsion, secretion, and absorption of organic molecules, and then eventually compaction and defecation. Okay, so why do we eat? We are We have to break down. It's called anabolism, catabolism. Catabolism is breaking down. Anabolism is building up. So catabolism, breaking down um, food products into big, long chains, into small either amino acids or sugars or fats, individual molecules that we can absorb. All right. And then from there, we absorb all that stuff into our system and then we use it for functions throughout our body. Okay. So all of the energy that you get comes from food. All right. Um, so we need a way to draw that energy out of the food and then take all of the waste product and push it out. Okay. So this is different than this waste product is different than waste product that comes out of our kidneys, right? So urine is waste from the blood, basically. This is waste that has not been absorbed into your body, okay? Or it's water that's being pushed out of your body through excretion, okay? So, so you're taking food, you're chewing it up, you're breaking it down a little, you're pulling. It's imagine like a big Lego statue, okay? You want the individual Legos, you're throwing it against the wall, and then you take the little Legos, you pick up whichever ones you need, you take the rest of them, shove them into a plastic bag, and throw them back. Okay, that's basically what's happening with metabolism and digestion. All right. So you can click on these links. I'm not going to, mostly because I haven't. I don't really know what they do, but I'm sure they're very helpful. Okay. All right. So here is all the major functions and the other functions. You're gonna want to know this whole slide. Okay. There's no way to break it to you that is palatable. See what I did there? But you're gonna have to know this whole slide. Okay, so if I ask you what is the major function of the esophagus, it's to propel food to the stomach. Okay. If I ask you what other function does the small intestine serve, it provides optimal medium for enzymatic activity. Okay. We're going to break down all of these little subsections individually. So don't feel like you have to like memorize this slide, but I do want you to kind of know at what point during digestion a certain process is taking place. Okay. Also, the order. Very important. Know the order. So if I ask you what is distal to the stomach and you say the esophagus, wrong. The distal organ to the stomach is the small intestine, specifically the duodenum, and then the jejunum, and then the ileum. Okay, so no, like proximal to distal in the digestive system. The most proximal is the mouth. Everything else is distal, okay, unless otherwise specified. So that's kind of how you break down like what's next in order of digestion. We can also just say what's next in order of digestion. That's very possible. Okay. So the layers of the alimentary canal. Okay, alimentary canal. Yeah, I'm gonna Google something. All right, the alimentary canal is just another word for the GI tract. So it is the tube of organs that run from the mouth to the anus. That's the Google definition. Okay. So it's the tube that food stays in. All right. So we're not including all of the supplemental organs that add to that tube. We're just talking about the tube itself. Okay. So mostly starting at the esophagus and ending at the anus. This is all going to stay pretty much the same. Okay. So let's work from, uh, let's go inside out, okay? So first is the lumen. Just like any tube in the body, the hole that is the hollow space is called the lumen, okay? So we start in the lumen of the alimentary canal. All right, we're gonna go to the first layer. This is the mucosal layer. So mucosa, think epithelium, It's also got the lamina propria and the muscularis mucosae. So there's three layers of the mucosa. So there's an inner epithelial layer. There's a lamina propria, which is like connective tissue layer, which will hold some of the glands, some of the lymphatic tissue, and all of the connective tissue that goes on in the mucosal layer. And then there is the muscularis layer of the mucosa. So this last little layer is a small muscle layer. Okay, this is where here's like it's a small muscle layer. It's not like anything crazy. It's mostly holding everything together. Okay, so you have mucosa, um, and the mucosa is going to be covered in mucus, right? Like it's got excretory cells, it's got cells that allow uh, things to diffuse through them, right? So you've got specific cells that will uptake, say, fats, for example. You've got specific cells that will allow diffusion of one thing but not the other. And you've got specific cells that will allow the other diffusions or excretion to take place. Okay, so that all happens on the surface epithelium. If we take the tube and we cut it open, let's pretend the mucosa is that top layer. Okay, so in the lumen, the most superficial layer in the lumen is the epithelium, and then the lamina propria, which holds everything together, and then the muscularis mucosa. Okay, so that is the mucosa. Okay, from there we've got submucosa. So there's also glands in the submucosa, right? And this is where most of the blood exchange is happening. Okay, so we've got to supply the blood supply to the mucosal layer. So these venules and arterioles, these all go down like really deep into here without ending up within the lumen, right? Like you don't want blood in the lumen. That's not a really good thing. So you're going to have a lot of the vasculature is in the submucosal layer. And then you're also going to have the submucosal plexus, so uh, the neural layer of the mucosa is going to come through here. Okay, so with everything in anatomy, it's not the plexus of Meissner because who the heck is that guy? Let's find out. Meissner, Dr. Meissner. Let's see. Meissner's plexus. It's named after George Meissner. You, sir, are not an anatomic feature. You don't deserve to be named after one. Okay? So, submucosal plexus is what we're going to call that for the purposes of this class. Okay? So, your mucosa, your submucosa, think submucosa, neurovascular. Okay? There's a lot of places in the body that have neurovascular systems. A lot of time, nerve and vascular goes hand in hand. Okay, they're either that's either they are contained within a bundle together, they are sitting next to each other. In this case, you have this plexus, which for the purposes of this class, let's call a plexus a bunch of nerves. Okay, so think like a nerve net that goes around all this. There's not specific nerves. It's just kind of a net, basically, that surrounds it. That exists within the submucosal plexus. Okay, so the submucosa is this layer right here. All right, and then we have the muscularis layer. So within the muscularis layer, there's two layers of muscle. So for those of you keeping track at home, we are now at three layers of muscle. We've got the muscularis mucosa. We've also got the circular muscle and the longitudinal muscle. Okay, these two muscle layers in the muscularis are contributing to peristalsis. Okay, so squeeze and then squeeze, squeeze and then squeeze. We're going to talk about peristalsis in a minute. but that's how food is moving throughout the body. Okay, so food being moved throughout the body is controlled by the muscularis layer of the alimentary canal. Okay, good test question. Which one of these is not part of the muscularis layer? And that would be the circular, the longitudinal, or the muscularis mucosa. Answer: muscularis mucosa. I don't feel like waiting. That was an easy question. It's right in front of you. But you might see that kind of question. Okay. All right. And then the last layer is the serosa layer. So mucosa, serosa. Okay. Can't take fast. Yeah. Speed it up. All right. So you have the areolar connective tissue. So you've got, and don't worry about like big words on that one. So it's just connective tissue layer and epithelial layer. Okay. So we've got, and that's true of all epithelial layers for the most part. We'll kind of talk about that in lab if we haven't talked about it already. Generally speaking, you have an epithelial layer followed by a connective tissue layer. So think basement membrane, think epithelial surface. If this is a mini body, this is the skin. All right. So this outer layer is the skin of your intestines, which is freaky to think of. Okay. All of this is considered the mesentery. Okay. So we'll talk about mesentery for a little bit later, but mesentery is like the group of the alimentary canal. All right. Like, there we go. All right. So modifications of the mucosa. So the mucosa, if we look in this layer, this little picture, this is not zoomed in enough. But this picture, you can kind of see some little individual cells lining this, but it looks real smooth, right? Wrong, it's not smooth. It is coated in these little outpouchings, and these are called villi, okay? So if you take like a piece of intestine, if you go to a butcher store and you ask them for a piece of 10 centimeters of cow intestine, they will give it to you, and you can cut it open, okay? And then you fold it open, and it's real wrinkly. It looks like a pug, okay? Now, these little folds do something. And I will let you guess in the chat what they do while I explain what exactly they are and why they are folded. Okay. So they are called villi. Each one of these little outpouchings. Okay. So within these villi, you have absorptive cells that are lining the outside. These are epithelial cells. Okay. And then you have generally a lymphatic vessel right here, and then an artery and a vein on either side. Okay, so you've got arteries that are supplying all the blood supply for all this, and then veins that are withdrawing all the blood supply, and then things that are being absorbed into the body are being absorbed into the lymphatic and venous system. Okay, generally lymphatic. Okay. Within each individual cell, you've got microvilli. So you've got villi, and then each villi has little projections called microvilli. Okay. And these microvilli are what facilitate absorption. Okay. So you might experience saponification from fats within the, let's call this the intestine. And those microvilli, they're just going to kind of pinch closed, create a vesicle, and draw in the food particles themselves. Okay. And then from there, it'll be broken down even further, and it'll push out particles, molecules. Okay. So like your cholesterol, your LDLs, your LDLs, all that stuff. That's going to be secreted out on this side. Okay. So this is the luminal side. This is not the serosal side. It's really more, let's call it the visceral side. Okay, this is within the organ. All right. Questions so far? Any questions? Nope. All right, thanks for everybody. Moving on. Smooth muscle. Okay, so Within the body, we've got three types of muscle, right? We've got smooth, we've got striated, skeletal, and then we also have cardiac. Okay. So, what makes smooth muscle different than all those other ones? Okay. It is found around the digestive, respiratory, reproductive tracts in the iris of the eye. Okay. The big thing to know about smooth muscle, it is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Okay. So autonomic neurons right here, that means what? Anybody want to guess? It means eyes. I'll get that. Oh, where is it? Oh, okay. If it's controlled by the autonomic nervous system, what does that mean for digestion? All right, I'll give you the answer, and the answer is it is not controlled by you. This is involuntary, and it is stimulated by acetylcholine. Okay, not epinephrine. So, fight or flight, rest or digest. We're talking rest or digest in here. Okay, so autonomic neurons, and they kind of are. This is a good representation. They're not like super ordered, I guess. Think like a weird basket, and then the nerves are kind of within it. So it's not like you're stimulating one part and then the whole thing is just contracting in like an orderly fashion. You're stimulating like all of it, and it's kind of crunching. Okay, that's a weird way to say it, but that's kind of how it is. Okay, this is a good example of that. So these muscle cells right here are individual muscle cells. You have these intermediate filaments between these dense bodies, and they're networked through the sarcoplasm. And so when you stimulate them, they all contract in like opposite directions. Okay. So what it does is it causes like a squishing effect. Okay. So you're uh, I just completely blanked. But you're squishing things, and then you're moving down the line and squishing things. It's not like a movement, like a singular movement, okay? Because you need to contract in a 360-degree um, luminal space, okay? So you got to contract here, then contract here, and then contract here. Think like milking a cow. Okay? Is that where your eyes begin? Maybe. I don't know. But if your eyes are big and wide, what has happened? Your autonomic nervous system has kicked in. Actually, it'd be your here. Sorry. Um, yeah, if your eyes are actually getting big, it's actually it's an opposite mechanism. So that was a bad example. Um, yeah, it's from something else. Um, but yeah, so think like squishing in different directions, okay? And you have to control it from multiple directions, which is why it all contracts together like this, okay? All right. It's innervated, like we said, with the autonomic nervous system. And there's vesicles, okay? So varicosity, think like bulge for varicose, like varicose veins. There's a varicosity within these axons, okay? So there's like these little bulges that are along the axons, the neurons. And basically, what it does is it will release like boom, release, boom, release, boom, release, boom, release. So that what it does is it causes like a in order reaction to create that peristalsis. Okay, so it's a delayed response throughout the entire system, right? All right, here's what smooth muscle cells looks like on histology. So we'll talk about this in lab a little bit, but if you can kind of look at this as like a cross section, it really gives a good example that like some of them are kind of moving in this direction, some of them are moving like into the page, right, and then some of them are kind of moving up and out, and then some of them are kind of waving over here. So it creates they're very not ordered, right? So that creates like a weird basket mesh system. So if you were to take a cross section of that, it would be like very evident, like, oh, they're not all in the same direction. Okay. If they were in the same direction, the bad thing about that is um, you wouldn't be able to push things along in like a peristaltic movement. Okay. So here's what it looks like. This is like the structure of a smooth cell, and you've got those dense bodies on the outside, and then you've got these scattered filaments throughout the sarcoplasm, and then they kind of interact with each other, right? So they're bound together at those dense bodies, and then as you stimulate this, that response is kind of moving through, and then it goes boom here, and then we'll stimulate that next muscle cell. Okay. So it's a network, right? And it works like in concert. So it creates that peristaltic movement. Okay. So when it occurs between all these filaments, the cell shortens. And because they're not in a straight line, the cell muscle twists like a corkscrew as it contracts. So it's like it's squelching and sweet, like think like you're like wringing out a sponge almost. That's probably a good example, actually. All right, so it's a very non uniform movement is the point that I want you to get from that. Okay, so you have different types of smooth muscle cells. There's multi-unit muscle cells and visceral smooth muscles. We're talking about these right here. Okay, so these are a little bit more like motor neuron or skeletal muscles, but they're connected to more than one motor neuron, and they are like a little more ordered and structured. Okay, these visceral smooth muscles are within the cell walls of the walls of the digestive tract, as well as the gallbladder and the urinary bladder, and then like a couple other like reproductive organs and stuff like that. And they're connected by gap junctions and dense bodies. Okay, so it spreads in a wave throughout the layer, and what that does is create that like rhythmic peristalsis. Okay, there's also cells within this called pace setter cells. So these think kind of like the cardiac muscle cells, where they can create their own rhythm at like 50 beats per minute. They don't really need stimulation. These also can kind of create their own rhythm too. Okay. And they're spontaneous at regular intervals. So we don't need to know like beats per minute or anything like that for these. Just kind of know that it's mostly an involuntary response, and it's an involuntary response to eating, right? Um, and your autonomic nervous system drives most of it, but then you also have these pace setter cells on the back end that can kind of keep it moving. Okay. All right. Got it. Awesome. Sweet. I love a good explanation. Okay. The peritoneum. So, what's the peritoneum? The peritoneum is a giant confusing mess. Just kidding. Okay, so we talked a little bit. If you watched the bonus episode, we talked about how these germ layers, right? So your endoderm, right? Your endoderm splits off of that biconcave disc or bilayered disc in the embryo, and it kind of outpouches out and creates this tube system, right? That becomes your um, digestive system. Okay, so the outer layer It's all the same layers of cells, okay? So in order to create all this, it's got to fold on itself, okay? So we've got to create those folds that can create the folds within the digestive tract, okay? So it's, let's say we start here, which we don't. We really start, let's see, we're right itself. We really start close to the liver, but that's not in this section. I don't see a liver. I see a gallbladder. So the liver, oh, here's the liver. Okay. So if this is the liver right here, let's say we start here. So this, if you trace it all the way around, this is all the same layer of cells. Okay, so these are all the same thing. We end up with these folds within this that create spaces. Okay, so there's spaces between these folds that things exist, like your small intestine. But you can actually separate these folds most of the time. Okay, now there's five major peritoneal folds. Okay, there's the greater omentum, the falciform ligament, the lesser omentum, the mesentery, and the mesocolon. Okay, and this is kind of what it looks like. So if you were to kind of pull all of your guts out, that's what you would see. Yeah, go hunt a deer and you'll really understand this. It's kind of hard to see on like smaller organisms, animals, but on like larger animals, you really see that. So this is what the inside of you looks like. It's not just like a tube that's kind of jumbled up into a mess. It's structured within these folds. And the reason for that is there's an order to how it's embryologically um, generating, growing, I guess. Um, and without that order, you end up folding on top of yourself, and then you end up with knots, right? So like things will get looped and stuff. So you want to keep those in order. So you create these folds so that it can just kind of fold on itself. It doesn't just like kind of jumble up in a mess. Think of like if you were to take a big rope and kind of take it and throw it, that would be bad. It would take you forever to undo it. Whereas if you kind of like loop it around and like fold it over here, loop it around, fold it over here, you can just grab one side and pull and undo it. So, okay. So there's so this layer that creates those folds, that's the peritoneum. Okay. And everything within that is the peritoneal cavity. Cool. So know what these are. So the greater omentum is a like an apron-like structure that lies superficial to the small intestine and transverse colon. It lies like along the whole front. Okay, so like if you were to make an incision, and we'll talk a little bit in the lab about it. If you were to make an incision and then open it up, there's like a straight layer. Okay, so it looks flat. All of that just kind of flaps up. That's the greater omentum. Okay. Um, so, and it looks mostly like fat and people are overweight. That's true. There's also some neurovascular functions for the greater omentum, and there's also some lymphatic functions of the greater omentum. Okay. The falciform ligament is what anchors the liver to the anterior abdominal wall and inferior border of the diaphragm. This is derived from your umbilical cord. I think. Yes, it is. And then you have your lesser omentum. So this is kind of what sits between, it kind of like, this is like lesser omentum. All of the stuff that's kind of between all of the intestines, okay? And it suspends the stomach from the inferior border of the liver and it provides a pathway for structures connected to the liver. So your stomach, it's not just kind of free floating. It's got this like section that's connected to the bottom, okay? To the inferior border. Okay. Your mesentery is a vertical band of tissue. Think like what are those toys that kids have? That it's like a stick, and then you put the little donuts on top of it. think that those donuts are like mesentery. Okay, so they're just little folds that end up holding it all together. Okay, and then the mesocolon attaches the two portions of the large intestine, so the transverse and sigmoid colon, to the posterior abdominal wall. Okay, so it attaches part of the colon to the posterior abdominal. All right. A lot of these folds in the peritoneum are just tacking things together. That's really what the biggest function is. All right, digestive system and processes. Okay, so let's talk mechanical digestion first. Okay, so there's chewing in your mouth, muscles of mastication, right? All these going on. So if you eat, you've got to break up that food into smaller pieces. Otherwise, it will hurt going down, right? So there's chewing in the mouth, there's churning in the stomach. So your stomach, think like tummy growls, okay? So it's flipping that food over. It's kind of like massaging the food and really breaking it down even more. And then there's that happens throughout the stomach and then really throughout the whole intestine. And then there's segmentation in the small intestine, which is where it breaks down even further. Okay? This propulsion is driven by swallowing in the oropharynx. So your tongue and your oropharynx, you can swallow food, right? And then peristalsis from here down, okay? And that's not anything you can control, right? And then there's also chemical digestion. So you've got glands within here. So you've got salivary glands that release salivary amylase. Amylase is a sugar enzyme. So it breaks down sugars in your mouth. Okay. And then you've also got acid in your stomach, and that breaks down fats, right? Proteins. Acid breaks down proteins. Yes. And then you've got, yes, because bile breaks down fats. You've got bile that's secreted by your gallbladder that will mix with all this and break down fats within your intestine. Okay. From there, you have to absorb all those things, all those little Legos that you've thrown against the wall. You've got nutrients and water that you have to absorb to the blood vessels and the lymph vessels in the small intestine, and then water to blood vessels in the large intestine. So water reabsorption mostly happens in the large intestine, but it also happens kind of along this entire process. Okay. All of that results in feces, which you will defecate. All right. So peristalsis is the movement of food through the digestive tract. We've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's a wave of muscle contraction and relaxation. So you're milking a cow. You are a caterpillar on the ground. What's another example of peristalsis? I don't know. Other examples of things worm, doing the wave, doing the worm on the ground. How disruptive is that process without a gallbladder? Not amazingly disruptive. You'd be surprised. We'll talk about gallbladder a little bit later. Your gallbladder is a storage for bile, right? So you can store it in the gallbladder and then pump it out as needed. But bile is actually created in the liver. It's not created in the gallbladder. So you're pushing bile in from the liver into the gallbladder and then out of the gallbladder into your intestine. So you don't need a gallbladder to survive. It will certainly help you break down fats, but it is not a all be all of digestion. Same reason you don't really need a stomach to digest proteins. And in fact, some people don't have stomachs either. If you get your stomach stapled, they can do entire I don't want to say stomach activity, that's not correct. But they'll basically like cut here and then sew those two together, yeah, like a sleeve. A sleeve is really they kind of create a smaller stomach. But yeah, like you don't really need this whole thing. Now it helps, and there's other problems that arise from removing that. But you don't all of this breakdown of tissue or of food happens in unequal um, proportions throughout the entire system. Okay, so there's pancreatic amylase that'll also break down sugars. So you don't need all these glands to break down all the sugars, right? Like there's other things that are happening. We'll kind of touch on those a little bit, but just like all metabolism, people think like, oh, I'm running because it burns a bunch of fat. That's not true. Aerobic exercise burns mostly fat, but it also burns other sources of energy. It also burns glucose. It just burns fat at a higher rate. So the same thing happens here. You're able to metabolize all these things, but you're metabolizing them at a higher rate at certain points throughout. So don't think of it as like well, if I didn't digest sugar right here, it's just never going to get absorbed. No, that's not true. You have these systems throughout your body that are redundant that can help along with that process. So it is disrupted. There are consequences to removing a gallbladder or a stomach, um, but it's not the end all be all. People survive with all that, right? All right, peristalsis. That. All right, so let's break down individually. Okay, so digestion of food begins in the oral cavity. Okay, so you shove something into your face hole, and then you start munching. Nom 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 nom. Okay, your teeth are doing a lot of the ripping and pulling. Okay, so they're like pushing together and breaking up. Okay, your tongue, what it does is you punch things, and then your tongue pushes it out of the way, and then more stuff fills in, and then you punch it with your teeth. Okay, so a lot of mechanical breakdown is happening right here. Okay. Um, though this is all mediated by like muscles of mastication. Okay. It's also helped along by saliva. So you've got these glands that are all around your mouth. And it's true. They're like your whole mouth, there's a whole outer section that surrounds all that, and it's all glandular tissue. It's super fun to dissect. Um, because I never get to dissect it. So it was super fun. So there's all these little glands and all these little ducts that will kind of shoot saliva into your mouth, and that will help kind of soften the food, right? So that you can chew it at a better rate. Okay. So there's enzymes. So think like Joey Chestnut dips his hot dog in water. That kind of weakens up the hot dog bun a little bit. But there's also enzymes that are breaking down the starches in that hot dog bun as well in your saliva. Okay, you can't replace that with just water. So there's salivary amylase. That's the big enzyme here that's doing all of that. And then with the help of the tongue, the resulting bolus is moved into the esophagus. So look at one thing I do want to point out on this. Look at the tongue, okay? Your tongue is way more than just this little noodle that sticks out. It is massive, okay, compared to what you think it is. This part is the part that's free and loose, like right here, really. And this whole thing is still tongue, okay? So you have this like it manually moves food to the back of your throat, and then you have this like peristaltic movement that pushes it down into your esophagus. Okay, so and all of that is mediated by the tongue. That's like really the only muscle like right here. There's not really, I mean, there's like circumferential muscles in the pharynx, but not really. That it's mostly mediated by the tongue until you get to the esophagus. Okay, and then you've got muscles there that mediate that. That resulting food that ends up in your esophagus, that's called a bolus. Okay, bolus is Latin for a bunch of stuff. I don't know. Let's find out. Let's Google. Bolus is a small rounded mass of a substance. There you go. Or in medicine, a single dose or a drug of medicinal preparation, given all at once. So it's all of your food chewed up all at once, moving down your throat. Okay. So that goes into your esophagus. Quick question: what stops it from going into your larynx? Post in the chat. And the tongue, false. What stops food from going into your larynx? The epiglottis. There you go. Same one learning. All right. So your epiglottis will flop back. Actually, it doesn't flop back. It flops back this way, forward. It flops forward over your trachea and your larynx, and then food just moves past. Okay. So if your tongue is squeezing the muscles here, it's going to pull here, or push over here, and all of that food will move into the back of your pharynx and into the esophagus. And if you don't, it's called choking. That's bad. All right. So within the mouth, you've got a lot of stuff. Okay. This is your mouth. Some of your mouths are bigger than other mouths. Some people have small mouths. No judgment. You've got your lips, which are mostly used for holding your mouth closed, just like that. Okay. I'm gonna say of this diagram, no like the obvious stuff. No like the lips, the gingiva, the gums are called gingiva, right? The superior labial frenulum, yeah, kind of. I don't think I'll ask you where the frenulum is. But just know, like, kind of generally speaking, the anatomy of this, okay? Your hard palate, where it is in relation to your soft palate, all right? And then you've got tonsils, where your uvula is, and your cheeks over here. And then know the different types of teeth, okay? So you've got incisors, you've got canines, premolars, and molars, okay? Also the tongue, and that's it. Yep, that's all. And your face hole. All right, so let's look at the tongue real quick. The tongue is weird. It's a lot more weird than you think it is. All right, so from there you've got different papilla. So you've got filiform and fungiform papilla right here. So these filiform papilla are right here. Your fungiform papilla are on the interior. And then this dorsum of the tongue, this is just like that, right? All right, so from there, and I encourage you all to go look in the mirror after this because it's going to freak you out. You're not going to want to look at your tongue anymore. You've got circumvallate papilla. So there's more papilla back here. These are bigger, right? And then you've got the terminal sulcus. So that's where it turns from a normal looking tongue to a freaky looking tongue. And from there, you've got your lingual tonsils, okay? And that's all on the back of your tongue, okay? You've also got palatine tonsils on either side. And your palatopharyngeal arch, which is right here, and that's kind of the back side of it. And then you've got your epiglottis that flops back so that you don't choke and die on your food, okay? Your tongue is weird. That's what I want you to get from that. It's not smooth. Again, it's got these little villi. We didn't really, it doesn't touch much on taste, so I don't think you need to know much about taste. But just know that all these little villi and papilla control different taste centers, okay? So whether or not you can taste sweet or sour, umami, that's all controlled by these different papilla in different areas of your tongue, right? Permanent and deciduous teeth. Deciduous things fall out, right? Deciduous trees lose their leaves. Deciduous teeth fall out. So these are baby teeth. These are grown-up teeth. Okay. No, generally speaking, like when all of these things happen, like when you get your molars and wisdom teeth, like where they're located, and but you don't need to know like what is your sixth incisor or anything like that. Just know like what's an incisor, what's a canine, what's a molar. Okay. Teeth are pretty straightforward. Now let's talk about actual teeth. So the anatomy of the typical tooth, and you should know this one as well. So you've got your crown, which is the outside flat surface that you masticate on, right? So it's hard, and that's what you're chewing on. And that's covered by an enamel. Okay, so the outer layer is called the enamel, right? And then underneath that, you've got dentin, which is kind of like a filler layer. Maybe connective tissue would be a good thing to compare it to. And the inside, you've got pulp. So this, think of like your bones, like long bones, for instance. So this would be like the marrow, basically. So this contains blood vessels and nerves. Um, and then they're held in by these ligaments right here, so you can't rip them out unless you're a dentist. And then this whole thing on either side, this is called the root canal, right? So you've got your crown, your neck where all the pulp is, and then your root, which has the root canal. So root canal, they're drilling a hole here. They're coming down. They're clearing all of this stuff out. They drill out all this, and then they fill it in with like caulking, basically. And that's what a root canal is. And since teeth are vascular, that would kill the tooth. But not all of teeth are vascular. Not your whole teeth is not vascular. Okay. All right. So pharynx. Any question on teeth, tongue, anything in the mouth? Nope. Already speaks for everybody. Okay. So pharynx. We've kind of covered this a little bit with respiratory, but let's go over it again. So you've got your nasopharynx right here, your hard palate and your soft palate, and your uvula, which hangs off your soft palate. Okay. And then you've got your oropharynx, which is everything in the posterior of the mouth, right? And you've got your epiglottis and your glottis, and then your laryngopharynx right here, and then everything past that is your esophagus or your larynx and trachea. But we're just talking esophagus. Okay. So it runs from the nostrils to the esophagus and the larynx. Cool. Let's talk esophagus. The upper esophagus. So this is basically just a tube all the way down. Okay, this runs on gravity and a little bit of peristalsis. Okay, so your esophagus goes all the way down here, and up at the very top you have your esophageal sphincter. So you've got an upper esophageal sphincter and a lower esophageal sphincter. Okay, the upper esophageal sphincter is controlling the movement of food from the pharynx to the esophagus. So this, when you swallow, this opens and goes, yes, come into my esophagus, right? So that opens, food comes down here, mostly by gravity, a little bit of peristalsis helps it along, and then it gets here to your lower esophageal sphincter. This is the sphincter between your esophagus and your stomach, okay? So it allows food into your stomach. All right, let's talk about something crazy. Not really, is it a security concern? I want to see if I can do this. Please, I might download a virus to the computer. Yeah. This doesn't look like this works anymore. Okay, well that was a ripoff. All right, hang on. Let me see if I can do an animation. Let's see. How to GIF. Oh, look at whole video. Go look up a YouTube video on your own time of swallowing because it's kind of neat. And they have like MRI videos and stuff like that, which is cool too. So deglutition. That's a weird word, right? What does it mean? It means the voluntary phase and two involuntary phases, the pharyngeal phase and the esophageal phase of swallowing. This is eating stuff. Okay, it's a fancy word. It's just what happens when you go right. So that's deglutition. Okay. So if you take your food, which is called a bolus at this point, you've got a couple things that are happening. Okay. First, you're going to voluntarily swallow. It's not, you're going to make the decision. You're going to go, this is yummy. I'm going to swallow it or spit it out, but you're going to swallow it. Okay. During that, you have the superior pharyngeal constrictor muscle contracts, and then your medial pharyngeal constrictor muscle. Um, Basically, what's happening is these are contracting and opening up your pharynx so that your tongue can push the food to the back of your throat, and you're opening up your pharynx. Okay. From here, and we've all kind of felt what it feels like. Oh, please, I have to pause this. Sorry about that. My daughter ran up and went, "Daddy, daddy, daddy," and was holding pizza, and I couldn't find my wife. So that's bad. All right, so you voluntarily go, "Hey, I'm gonna swallow this. This is tasty. Nom nom nom." Okay, so from there, your medial and inferior pharyngeal constrictor muscles act to push the food down into your esophagus. Okay. And then your inferior pharyngeal and esophageal constrictor muscles will move that food all the way down. So most of the gravity helped by these muscles. Okay. So good test question. If I say your medial and inferior pharyngeal constrictor muscles are um, acting on a bolus of food, are you in the voluntary phase or involuntary phase? And the answer would be involuntary. Okay. All right. Peristalsis. I feel like we've talked about this a million times. I'm not going to talk about it again. All right. How are we doing on time? The stomach. Let's see. I was going to stop here. I just want to make sure that we're going to go over. Okay. I'm going to go a little further. I'm going to do the stomach real quick, and then we'll pick up after the stomach because this is a little more complicated afterwards. Okay. Stomach. You. All right. No. Oh, please. Stomach. Slideshow. Current slide. All right, the stomach. So at the very top is the esophagus. Okay. So this is not the stomach; it's the esophagus. Okay. Um, let's talk surface anatomy first. Okay. You've got the fundus of the stomach, which is this big pouch up on the top of it. Okay. And then you've got the body of the stomach, and that's this whole thing. Okay. All right. You've got curves in the stomach. So you've got a lesser curvature right here and a greater curvature. Okay. So the stomach is, think if you have like a big giant meal and you got a big belly sticking out, right? Like Thanksgiving, like we'll all be doing in a couple weeks, and you got this big giant belly sticking out. Okay, that's the greater curvature, and then your spine, right where your back is arched because you're holding your belly, that's the lesser curvature. Okay, so there's a shape to it. It's not just like a big bulge on both sides. Okay, so you can differentiate if you're looking at like the anterior stomach or the posterior stomach based off of the shape of the where those curves are. Where's my curves? Is this not working? Oh, there it goes. All right. So food comes in here. You've got the fundus, you've got the body of the stomach, this whole thing. It moves down here and then all the way over here to this section right here, which is the pyloric sphincter. So there is a sphincter right here that controls whether or not food can move in and out of the stomach. And then you have your duodenum. Okay. So a couple things of note. You have a GE junction right here, so your gastroesophageal junction. A junction is a transfer of cells. Okay, so you have esophageal cells that are turning into stomach cells right here. Okay, and that happens at the GE junction, the gastroesophageal junction. Okay, and then down here you have the GD junction, so your gastroduodenal junction, and your sphincter is what mediates that. So the junction is not what mediates the food transferring through. It is the point where the cells turn into something different. Okay, that's a junction. And the sphincter is the actual muscle that holds the food back, right? So you have your pyloric sphincter with the valve at the pylorus. Okay, so this is your fundus, this is the body, and then this is the pylorus, this last section of the stomach. And it terminates at the pyloric sphincter. And then everything after that is duodenum. Okay, so it kind of creates big space where food can kind of mix around and be digested. And then it goes into like a narrow space where it kind of squeezes it through the sphincter. Okay. All right. There's a couple different layers of the stomach. Okay. So if this is the lumen, right? Let's go inside to outside. The actually the first thing you'll notice is the mucosal layer. Okay. So if this is the mucosal layer, you've got rugae, which are the folds. Okay, so kind of like villi. So wrinkles, your stomach shaped like a pug on the inside. Okay, and then you've got a muscularis layer. Remember, because you've got mucosal, then muscularis, and then the serosa layer, right? So the next thing is muscularis. You've got 3 layers of muscularis. So you've got a longitudinal layer that goes from proximal to distal, right? You've got a circular layer that kind of surrounds the whole stomach. And then you have an oblique layer. So muscles of layer that are kind of going across in different ways. All of that helps to mix up the stomach, the chyme for the stomach, okay? So the food is a bolus here, and then it turns into chyme in here. So you're mixing up the chyme. And chyme is really more like once it's almost finished, but you're mixing all that food up, and that's being mediated by the muscularis layer. Okay, so 3 layers. Know what those layers are, and that they exist in the stomach. Because I guarantee you, a test question is going to be like, "Hey, where's the longitudinal layer?" And then it'll be like the stomach or the small intestine. You have to pick the stomach. Okay, so know that. All right. Next, you have your serosa. So again, right there, on the inside, the serosa. Pyloric antrum. That's just this section right here. Yeah, 3 layers. All right. Any questions? Did I cover all the terms on here? I did cover all the terms. Okay. Mechanical digestion is big for the stomach. Okay, that's you're mostly mechanically digesting. And you have stomach acid, which is breaking it down too. All right, let's talk a little bit of histology. We'll see more of this in lab, but I want to kind of touch on it since it's here. So your stomach exists in a very specific environment. Okay, it's acidic, right? We've got stomach acid that breaks down food. Okay, so oh geez. All right. So in your epithelial mucosal layer, right here, you've got these folds, right? These rugae. Okay. Now, in the mucosal layer, you've got the surface epithelium, the lamina propria, the muscularis mucosa. That's all the same throughout the entire thing. And then you've got a submucosa and then a muscularis externa. Okay, so this muscularis externa has these three specific layers of the stomach. The mucosa is the same. Okay, but within the mucosa in the stomach, you have these glands. Let's call them. They are glands. Okay. So these glands, you have chief cells, right? Enteroendocrine cells, and then parietal cells. Okay. So the if this is a whole gland, so this is like one of these things right here. You have different cells. So your chief cells are secreting enzymes. Okay. So they're secreting enzymes and like stomach acid. Right. Your enteroendocrine cells, those are secreting endocrine hormones. Okay, so like leptin, stuff like that, things that are telling, or like gastrin, things that are telling your stomach like to create more acid, basically. Okay, and then your parietal cells. Just want to make sure I tell you this right. Those are the ones that create intrinsic factor and hydrochloric acid. Okay, so this is your stomach acid. Those come from the parietal cells. Your chief cells in the stomach, they release the enzymes, okay? And then your enteroendocrine cells, those release hormones, all right? And it doesn't, I don't think you need to know exactly what hormones and enzymes and all these produce, but they're produced, okay? Any questions on the stomach? Nope. Okay. Lab is going to be a review session for the test next week. So we're not going to get into the histology of the stomach this week. We're going to start jumping back into normal lab stuff next week. So you're going to have a test and new material next week. So love it if you participate. If you feel like you need to catch up on videos later and get behind, that's totally your prerogative. Okay. But for this week, we're going to do a review session tonight. And then on Thursday night, I haven't decided yet. Let's see how tonight goes. If you need a second review session, I can be available for a second review session. If not, I'll push it to my asynchronous class and I'll let them have a review session as well. Otherwise, I'll just do my review session Friday or something. So, cool. Come with questions. This is a self-guided review session. Okay, see you later.